Hello again, everyone. Daniel Breton here from Electric Mobility Canada. It's with great pleasure that I have the opportunity to talk to Steven Guilbeault, who is Minister of Heritage, and he is the MP of Laurier-Sainte-Marie. He is the candidate in the same riding, and he knows a lot about electric mobility. So without further ado, I will let Steven Guilbeault talk to us and explain to us the Liberal Party vision about the future of electric mobility. There you go, Steven.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and thank you all for being here. It's a real pleasure to be with you. I would first like to acknowledge that I am on the traditional territory of the Mohawk and other Haudenosaunee people here in Montreal. And listen, I mean, I've been a fan of electric mobility for a number of years. Daniel and I have worked together in Quebec to implement many of the groundbreaking measures that we've seen in the province of Quebec, and that we are now happily seeing replicated elsewhere in Canada. The purchase incentive in Quebec, the ZEV mandate, which was at the time quite a feat for the province of Quebec, because it was adopted unanimously in Quebec City. So there was no opposition to it, which was, I mean, for something as new and groundbreaking, quite a feat. So I have been both professionally and personally very interested in electric mobility. When I was with Equiterre, we started organizing what we would call les rendezvous branchés. Daniel has been to a number of them, the plug-in rendezvous, where people could come and try electric vehicles. They could ask questions from electric mobility users. And I've continued that work onto the federal government. So in 2019, I was asked to co-chair a working group on climate change for the federal government. I was not in government at the time. And our mandate was to look at what more could the government do, both on the retrofit and building side, but also on transportation. At the time, the government had already announced a number of measures regarding transit, but they wanted to have more ideas of what they could do. And many of our recommendations of that working group were along the lines of electrifications, namely that the federal government also put in place an incentive for the purchase of electric vehicle, and also that the federal government put in place a ZEV mandate. I was, as a co-chair of a working group, very successful, because few weeks after the report was tabled, the federal government did put in place the incentive for the purchase of electric vehicle. And I've continued working since then, and obviously as part of the government since 2019, since the election, to ensure that we take really a holistic approach when it comes to electrification. You know, of course, it's about EVs, but for us really, and I think you've seen a number of steps we've taken over the course of the last 2 years to show that, you know, it is about EVs, but it is about supply chain. It is about making some EVs in Canada, and the agreement Unifor, the Canadian government, the Ontario government, NGM came to for the plant in Ontario. It is about batteries. The agreement and the funding we provided to Lyon for their battery factory north of Montreal. And when you look at our platform, so you know, we are committing to 100% EV sales by 2035. It's going to be a regulated, so it's not a voluntary target. It's going to be a regulated target, and moving into a ZEV mandate. But we're also looking at a number of other things, such as mineral batteries, critical minerals. We want to provide tax credits for the mining exploration for critical minerals. We want to position Canada as a global leader in the recycling and reuse of battery components. I mean, we know there's a shortages of certain key materials right now worldwide. So why not use them where they're already there? We don't have to mine them in many cases. So that's certainly something that we've put together in our platform. The other thing, and I'll stop because my time is almost up, but the other thing we feel is really important, and we have engaged the US administration is to try and look at this as a North American approach, and not just, Canada versus the US versus Europe versus China, but what about, Canada and the US working together and hand in hand, and having an integrated approach to electric vehicle and electric mobility in North America. The Biden administration is very interested in that. We've had numerous conversations, various ministries and ministers, environment, economic development, finance, obviously the prime minister and the president. So we really see this as, it's not the only path forward, obviously, when we look at transportation, but certainly one of the key components of a low carbon and eventually a zero carbon transportation system in Canada.
Thanks a lot, Steven. Very interesting. So now we'll move on to the question period. So I'll start right off with the first question, which I think is key, is this one. Is the Liberal government in favor of the creation and deployment of a comprehensive Canadian electric mobility strategy that includes a ZEV supply chain strategy in order to create sustainable, high-paying, high-quality Canadian jobs across the country, especially now that we have a hydrogen strategy?
Yes, absolutely. And I don't see, and we don't see the hydrogen strategy and the electric mobility strategy as coming in competition with one another. The applications are likely going to be very, very, very different. And we've provided substantial funding for both strategies. Our green relaunch plan, recovery plan, is according to an international NGO called Energy Policy Tracker. Canada has the second most ambitious recovery plan of all G20 countries, and it's the number one in the G7. So it's more than $40 billion just this year for the green economy. So some of it for hydrogen, for sure, but a lot of it, and I've named a number of initiatives that either we've put forward or that we've put in our platforms, in terms of what we would do if the Liberal government would be reelected. But the short answer, that was a long answer, but the short answer to your question is yes.
Okay. Just so you know, I think in about a week and a half from now, we will be launching EMC with other stakeholders, what will be called the Accelerate Alliance, which will be working on the Canadian ZEV Supply Chain Alliance across the country with different organizations, private companies, NGOs and all that, so that we can accelerate that ZEV supply chain and for Canada. So we'll probably invite you if you're interested.
With great pleasure.
Okay. So second question, do you have a plan to develop and ensure Canadian access to strategic minerals in an environmentally respectful way? When we look at the way things are going right now, if I'm not mistaken, 99% of lithium extracted in Canada goes directly outside the country.
Well, yes, and I think your point earlier about the supply chain is key. I mean, the question really for a country like ours and many others, do we simply want to be a purchaser of technologies that others are producing and vehicles that others are producing, or do we want to try and carve out a piece of that pie that is getting bigger and bigger as months and years go by? And I think just asking the question is clearly answering it. Yes, we want to have a part of that pie, and the supply chain is key. So hence some of the measures that I talked about, like the tax credit for mining, for critical minerals, and working to support various components of the supply chain innovation through some of the mechanisms that we have, BDC, for example, in terms of investing in new technologies. I can think of, GAN system in Ontario that produces microchips using gallium instead of lithium, which has the advantage of being, you can obtain it from many industrial byproducts, so you don't have to mine it. And gallium is more efficient than lithium for microchips. This Canadian company, which is partly funded by the federal government, has deals with BMW for their EVs, Tesla's, And I think Toyota as well. So a number of international companies are looking at this and saying, wow, this is interesting. So I think these sort of initiatives we need to multiply, we need to support, and it needs to be part of that holistic approach I was talking about a little bit earlier.
Okay, so basically you answer my third question is, you have a plan to develop value-added transformation of strategic minerals in Canada. Basically what you're saying is absolutely, because we want not only to extract and export, but have value-added transformation in Canada for products and technologies. Is that it?
Yeah, and in the last book that I published just before running for election in 2019, I looked at electrification of transportation and self-driving vehicles and some of the issues relating with critical minerals and some of the human rights issues, and we've seen those. But even when you look at reports from Amnesty International, who are saying, we have to deal with this issue in the Congo Basin, for example. But despite that, even an organization like Amnesty is saying the benefits of electrification are such that we need to continue doing that. We need to figure out a way to deal with the human rights problem, and there are things we need to do in those countries. But obviously, if we get some of the minerals here and we ensure that it's done responsibly, both from a social and environmental manner, we have now at the federal level a very robust environmental impact assessment process that was adopted just before 2019. So we really see Canada as being able to. I mean, we won't become, we won't become dominant on the world stage, but we can play a role, and we can play a very positive role at that.
Okay. Let's talk about incentives now. Is the Liberal Party in favor of offering light-duty car or light truck electric vehicle purchase incentives? And if so, would you like the rebates? Would you say that the rebates will stay as they are now? Expand the rebates to include more types of EVs, like light trucks, for instance, raise and expand the EV rebate, or lower the present rebate?
So I think for vehicles like duty vehicles, I think that the rebate is probably at the right point, and it should stay there until the cost of EVs is on par with internal combustion engine. In my mind, there's no point in keeping it once that there's no longer this price difference. But we clearly see, the studies are clear. This is one of the obstacles for people going from internal combustion engine to EVs. It's the price difference. There are a couple of other obstacles which are largely in people's mind, like they're not necessarily very factual, but they are obstacles nonetheless. We, as you've seen, we first implemented this purchase rebate in 2019, in budget 2019. We have added more money in the last budget because the program was so popular, and we want to stay alert to see whether or not, you were talking about trucks, for example. Is this something we could do? Could we raise the cap? We initially, to be totally honest with you, I wasn't sure that the cap was high enough, but clearly what we've seen is a number of manufacturers bringing down the cost of their vehicles so they could fit under the federal cap for the incentive. So I think that in a way that mechanism worked, but I think we need to stay alert and to see how the market and consumers evolve around this, and we may need to tweak the system. But I think right now it's clearly hugely popular, it's working, and we will continue to support it.
Okay. When I look at your program, it says here in your platform, invest an additional 1.5 billion in the ISEV rebate program and broaden eligibility to a wider range of vehicle types. So that, hence our questions. So I guess that there will be some tweaking that can be made with the new vehicles coming to market, especially the electric pickup trucks, for instance, which will be coming to market soon. Okay.
And we know Perfect. It's a big segment.
It's the biggest segment, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And are you in favor of offering specific electric vehicle purchase incentive for lower income citizens or families? Like California, for instance.
Yeah, this is not something we've looked at so far. But certainly something I would be willing to explore with my colleagues. It's not part of the platform right now. I mean, you are right to point out that California is being doing. We've certainly been paying close attention to the Quebec pilot program for used EV, which is in its second or third year now. And I think the Quebec government wanted to do a review of the program after a few years to see, what are the lessons learned from that program, because obviously this is another way of making EVs more accessible if we're supporting the purchase incentive for used EVs. Obviously the question is, well, can someone receive the incentive twice? No, the same car can receive the incentive twice, but at least as long as it's not the same person, then I'm okay with that. So I think there are a couple of different mechanisms that we could use to do that, but certainly worth exploring.
Well, which brings me to my next question. But when I look at your platform, where we say, are you in favor of offering used electric vehicle purchase incentives? Actually, it says in your platform that you would be inclined to include used vehicle purchase incentive purchase.
Yeah, that, as I said, that conversation has started with our government in the last few months. And when we have the example of Quebec that has been doing it for a couple of years, so certainly something we would be willing to look at.
Okay. Are you in favor of HST exemption or adjustments for the purchase of light duty vehicles?
I mean, these type of fiscal incentives might be more interesting for fleet purchases than the direct incentive. So maybe municipalities, companies with large fleets, whom the direct incentive might, for all sorts of reasons, might not work, and tax incentives might be more interesting. I mean, I think we need to have a system that works, and the same approach doesn't necessarily work for all segments of consumers. So I think we have to be able to, we have to be willing to look at different approach to ensure that what we're proposing works for everyone, or as many people or organizations as possible.
Okay. Next question is something you and I have talked in the past about. Are you in favor of a fiscally neutral fee-based system to help accelerate the transition towards greener vehicles? A fee-based system may mean that there would be a fee for a gas guzzler that finances EV rebates, and may have exemptions for people who need bigger vehicles that are not yet available, and an electric version for big families, workers, or farmers.
Well, I think indirectly we're already doing that with carbon pricing in Canada, because I mean, what happens is in those provinces that have decided to go with the federal system, the individuals receive the money directly from what they've paid in terms of the carbon pricing. And then as a consumer, I mean, you can choose to keep your big gas guzzler and just take the money the federal government is giving you and put it in gasoline in your big gas guzzler, or you can decide to take a different approach and to keep the money for other things you would like to do with it. Go for a smaller vehicle, go for an EV. So you know, it's not as direct as the bonus malus. I'm not sure how to say that in English. That you and I have spoken about, the fee-based that we've spoken about. But I think that the carbon pricing system that we've implemented, and that will, and where the price will accelerate post 2022 from $10 a year to $15 a year, is clearly a way of doing exactly that.
Okay. Let's talk about medium and heavy duty vehicles now, if you don't mind. Is your government in favor of offering medium and heavy duty electric vehicle purchase incentives?
Well, I think we spoke about that a little bit earlier, and you know, as these vehicles, it wasn't really a question just a year or two ago, because these vehicles weren't available. I think that this is clearly an issue that we will need to tackle as these vehicles become more widely available. And we've certainly seen Ford and other companies make some pretty serious play in this. So this is clearly something that we will need to pay attention very soon into the next mandate.
Okay. And are there any other policies or programs that you support to accelerate the deployment of medium and heavy-duty electric vehicle, such as bulk buy, financing support from the CIB, infrastructure installation support, or any other policies regarding medium or heavy-duty?
Well, you talk about infrastructure. This is one other area where we have been making significant investment in the last 2 years. For the electric charging stations, you've seen our program. By the end of 2024, we'll have 17,000 fast charging stations installed throughout Canada. As a side note, I don't own a vehicle personally, but my service vehicle as minister, we had to renew the rental at the ministry, and I said, well, if we're renewing, let's go for 100% EV. First time that a federal minister did that, had to go through and jumps through a whole bunch of hoops, but it's done.
I know the feeling.
So my service vehicle is now a Bolt, and it's fascinating to be experiencing some of the issues regarding fast charging stations. Between Montreal and Ottawa. I mean, I tried to take the train as much as possible, but during the pandemic, it wasn't always possible. So clearly we see that investment by the federal government, and some provinces clearly are doing it as well, into infrastructure. But just 2 weeks ago, I was visiting the garage of the Montreal South Shore Transit Corporation. They've purchased, as you know, 5 electric buses.
Yep. And
we were having this conversation about the fact that these transit companies will need support from governments to transform their garage from being able to handle diesel engines, and in some cases hybrids, to 100% electric buses. So I mean, it's key. We can't help public transit companies buy electric buses, for example, without helping them with the infrastructure that will be needed to maintain and to provide electricity for these buses. So this is clearly a very, very important issue.
Or electric school buses, for that matter.
Exactly, electric school buses is another very good example.
Yeah. Are you in favor of offering purchase incentives for e-bikes, e-scooters, e-motorcycles, e-snowmobiles, recreational boats that are electric?
I clearly think we need to look at these types
especially since more and more of them are made in Canada.
And we're certainly seeing on the bike side of things. But I mean, we were seeing this in Europe and Asia before we saw it here in Canada, but it's really taking off now in Canada. And I think certainly in the case of the e-bikes, there is a clear, not just, I mean, there is a clear environment benefit from an air pollution, from a greenhouse gas pollution, but also from an urban planning perspective. These bikes are used by people in many cases who probably wouldn't be using a bike and would be using a car to move around the city. But all of a sudden, because of this electric assistance, they can do distances that they couldn't do before. Yep. So certainly in the case of bikes, I'd be more than happy to look at it. For leisure vehicles, I would want to see what the benefits. I think I would need to be convinced of the benefits, but in the case of bikes, for me, it's a slam dunk.
Okay. Well, for instance, when you look at a snowmobile versus an electric snowmobile, when we're talking not so much about greenhouse gas emissions, but about air pollution, one regular snowmobile can pollute as much as 40 cars.
Yeah, I know.
So there's a big environmental plus in there, you know?
You're right.
Let's talk about infrastructure now. Are you in favor of rebates for the purchase of electric vehicle chargers in existing residential or commercial buildings or workplaces?
It's not something we're doing yet. Obviously, some provinces, certainly Quebec, is doing it. But this is also something that we would be willing to look at. It's not something we've looked at so far, but we know that it is an important investment for individuals. So yes, this is something that we would be willing to look at.
Okay, but let's talk now not so much about the charger, but about the installation of the chargers, because you know as much as I do that many homes across the country in Canada are 40 years old or older, which means that, for instance, where the house that I bought was 45 years old. When I wanted to install the charger, I had to change the old electric panel because it was too old. So our question is, are you in favor of rebates for the installation of electric vehicle chargers? It could be going through the energy efficiency program, for instance, whether for residential, commercial buildings, or workplaces.
Well, one element we've already started tackling is changing the building code to ensure that it can accommodate charging stations, and for large charging stations for multi-apartment buildings. So that doesn't answer your question, but certainly for new build, it's something we've started looking at. We have not started looking at what about existing build and examples like the ones you give. It's not something we've looked at yet. Okay.
The next question was, are you in favor of modernizing the building code? So I guess your answer is yes, obviously.
Totally, it's already there.
Yeah. Let's talk about support for expanding public charging infrastructure. So are you in favor of investing in the deployment of public level 2 charging infrastructure at the level they are now, 50%, or up to 75%?
We are, yes, obviously we're doing it right now in collaboration with provinces across the country and municipalities. I'm not sure if we're at 50% or 75%. That's a good question. I'm not sure what the level of investment is, but we are deploying this program. As we're already providing more than $1 billion for that, and we want to add another 1.5 billion going forward.
Okay. And now let's talk about fast and super fast chargers. You mentioned that. Are you in favor of the deployment of public fast and super fast charging infrastructure, not only for highways, but for downtown areas as well, for people, let's say, who live in apartment buildings and that cannot have access to charging in their own home? So is that something that you want to invest in? I know the answer is yes, but could you expand on that?
Well, I mean, we need that. Clearly, I think when the electric charging station system was being deployed, there was this perception that fast charging stations would not be required, and clearly we're seeing now how essential it is. And if you look at the example of Norway, very clearly this is the way to the future if we want wide use of EVs. So we are already funding those initiatives, and yes, it should be on the side of highways, but it needs to be in cities as well. Certainly, you would know that probably better than anyone, but fast charging stations on the island of Montreal is a challenge. Like there's to
say the least.
So whenever I use a vehicle between Montreal and Ottawa, my driver has to be sure that either on the way here or on the way back, we have to stop in the suburbs somewhere or in Ontario highway to find a fast charging station. So there's a clear need for that in cities as well as between cities.
And I don't know if you know about this, but when we go back 5 years ago, in Quebec, for instance, like 55% of zero-emission vehicles being sold in Quebec were plug-in hybrid vehicles. And now when we look at the market in California and Norway and Quebec and Ontario and BC, we're between 70 and 80% of 100% electric vehicles. So the market is switching, which means that we need more and more fast chargers because of that new market coming in.
The infrastructure must adapt to that, to those changing trends. Absolutely.
Yeah. Next question. Are you in favor of a federal light duty zero emission vehicle mandate for 2030, 2035, 2040?
2035, that's already in our platform. And we even announced it before the election with Minister Alghabra and Minister Wilkinson.
Okay, so So yes, you are in favor of a ZEV mandate for 2035, 100% sales.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Now, if we go to, I'm getting mixed up in my paper. Are you in favor of a federal medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicle mandate for 2035, 2040, 2045? I think I saw a number here.
In our platform.
In your platform.
Well, it's something we want to look at for sure.
So it says here, require 100% of medium and heavy duty vehicle sales to be zero emission by 2040 where feasible. So that's in your platform.
I mean, I think we are less definitive in our platform on this because it's a really emerging market. There's clearly less experience with these types of vehicles than light duty vehicles, where they've been around. We're deploying charging stations. We have much, and it's true in Canada, but it's true of international experiences as well. So yeah. I think we feel we need to learn more before being more definitive on that segment of vehicles.
Okay. Something that I'm sure will really interest you. Do you support the financing of national education and training programs for citizens, businesses, employees to help accelerate the transition towards electric vehicle? In fact, I think this is two questions in one, meaning there's the education side, but the training side as well. So any position on that?
Yes, I mean, you and I have done a lot of that education in our career. It's key. I mean, there's, as I was saying earlier, we know what the obstacles are to many people going for EVs. In many cases, it is about a lack of information.
Yeah.
It's about certain myths that people have heard regarding electric vehicles. Not working in the winter, not being able to charge. All of these things, you've heard them, I've heard them. So it's clearly education is a clear element, and it is, generally speaking, when we look at environmental issues. But we need to we need to do that.
Yeah, but that's the education side. But in your platform, you talk about also address gaps in training and upskilling to ensure that all Canadian workers can take advantage of battery industry opportunities. So would you like to expand on that? Talking about, training workers or retraining workers who maybe lose their job in the fossil fuel industry, for instance.
Well, this is already something we've started working on as part of new training programs at the federal level, unemployment insurance, coming up with we are actually working on rejigging the unemployment insurance system in Canada. The COVID certainly highlighted some of the cracks in that system, but also in light of the issue of fair transition. I was talking about the visit I was doing at the Transit Corporation on the South Shore garages a couple of weeks ago. They will need new mechanics to maintain these fully electric buses. And I mean, people who are on this call, on this video call, would know that. But can you imagine the amount of electricity required for charging tens and tens of buses at a Transit Corporation buses? I mean, you want to be pretty careful about that. So you need certified people, you need trained people to be able to handle this. It is a safety issue, but it's also about making sure that you're not damaging the vehicles, which are much more expensive to purchase right now. I mean, over time, I'm of the view that those costs will come down as we're seeing the cost of EVs coming down. But yes, this is a key component of our EV strategy.
Yeah, especially since, I mean, right in the middle of a pandemic, we already need more skilled people to work in electric mobility. So after the pandemic, I mean, it might become an issue to find enough qualified people to make sure that the growth is not stopped by the lack of employees.
Yeah.
Let's talk about government fleet now. Do you support adopting electric fleet procurement policy? I think it's in your platform, actually.
It's in our platform, yeah. It's already there. We started working on this. Obviously, the fact that as a cabinet minister, I purchased a 100% electric vehicle. I certainly bragged about it to my cabinet colleagues, but more seriously, it was a way to start having a conversation around the cabinet table about what do we do about government, and what do we do about purchasing at the government level, and what do we do about electric charging stations even on the hill in Ottawa and around the hill as more and more people will start to do that. So, I mean, we were talking about education earlier, and there's clearly public education that needs to happen, but there's also, we need to educate ourselves as governments, learn more about this. So, little side note, but first time my driver used the electric car, so I had to brief my department to tell them, listen, you need to get her a membership card for charging stations. She can't show up there with her credit card. And I explained it all to the department. Somehow the message never made it to my driver. She gets the electric vehicle, she gets in it, she comes to get me to Montreal, and then, I mean, she has to go, well, it was a test run, so I didn't actually have to go back with her. But since no one had given her a membership charging card, she had to hop from Chevrolet garages to Chevrolet garages all the way back to Ottawa to make it, because she couldn't charge anywhere else. And most of these places don't have fast charging stations. I'm happy as a minister to help people in my government understand, and go through these things. Now people understand, oh, okay, if we're buying an electric vehicle, we need to train our drivers.
Absolutely.
We need to provide them with the appropriate tools to be able to do that. And Danielle, when I made the decision, made the recommendation to the department to go for 100% EV, I was convinced that these type of things would happen. And I said, if I'm not willing to do that, and to
who
go
will be
things, who will?
Yeah. I so understand what you're talking about. Are you in favor of free EV federal ferry incentives or HOV lane priority, or potentially implement other non-financial incentives?
Well, I think we need to explore more incentives. Now, obviously, on reserve lanes, federal government is not really involved.
But I can give you an example. For instance, I mean, when I use my electric vehicle, and I take a ferry from the government of Quebec, it's free. But if I take the ferry to go to Madeline Islands, it's a federal ferry, so people have to pay. So that could be potentially some kind of incentive. Is that something that you could look into, or?
It's not something we've looked at, but we are certainly open at looking at other incentives that would encourage the use and adoption of electric vehicles.
Okay. So now let's go to our members' questions. Question from the audience: should Canada be striving to attract EV manufacturing investments from emerging and growing EV-only manufacturers? In other words, beyond the incumbent industry? If yes, what strategy would a Liberal government implement if re-elected to address barriers to investment by these EV-only manufacturers?
I can tell you that my colleague François-Philippe Champagne has been actively engaged on this file. So we talked a little bit earlier about GM, but yes, we want to do that. And we're willing to look at what type of federal incentives or support would be needed to attract these investments in terms of vehicle manufacturers, but also in terms of, I mean, the whole value chain of electric vehicles. I mean, there's clearly a lot of Canadian companies, but there's obviously, international talents and expertise we would want to attract to Canada.
Okay. Another question. We hear a lot about lithium and other critical minerals from all parties, but this question relates to less exotic metals like nickel and aluminum, which are a vital component on EV manufacturing. What more would a Liberal government do to create growth in Canadian supply of metals like nickel and aluminum to support EV manufacturing in Canada and North America?
I spoke about some of the of those incentives that certainly for mineral that we're key minerals that we are willing to provide to ensure that. There's one element that I didn't speak about, which is Canada investment law, where we would want to use it to ensure the protection and value of critical minerals in Canada, both from an economical point of view, but I think we really need to start looking at this issue as a national security issue. So, you know,
it is
about jobs, it's about electrification, but it's also about the future of mobility and being sure that we have all of the right components, all of the right players throughout the value chain in Canada.
Yeah, you know, Stephen, I think it's a geopolitical issue as well, because I mean, if most of the batteries come from Asia, and knowing the consideration, the Chinese consideration, it can become an issue that would end up being pretty much the same that we had with oil in the 20th century.
Yes, microchips is another clear example. I mean, it's not obviously not just
absolutely,
but the growing conversation about that as well here in Canada, and frankly amongst many of our allies in Europe, in the United States, in Japan, in Australia. So we need to pay very close attention to that.
Yeah, hence the Trudeau-Biden agreement, you know, on working together to develop North American battery. Yeah. Another question from one of our members. Would you be interested in looking at a way to support Canadian-made vehicle batteries, technologies made in Canada, almost like a Buy Canadian Act, like the US has with the Buy American Act?
Well, I think we're clearly doing some of that. The investment in Lyon for their battery factory is one clear example. I think in terms of similar legislation as the Buy American Act, I mean, I think we have to be careful with those. If we start putting those in place, then it's likely that you know, many of our commercial allies would start doing that. I'm not sure it would necessarily be a favorable outcome for us. I mean, clearly the US is doing. We are actually negotiating with them a way where on something like electrification, they don't do that, and we work at it from a continental perspective. And I'm not saying it's a done deal and this issue is resolved, but we have engaged the conversation with the Americans, and they are very open to having the conversation so far.
Okay. Well, before we finish, are there any other ideas, policies, or programs that you would like to talk to us about?
Danielle, I really think I ran through all of my ideas and certainly all of the elements in our platform. And I would invite your viewers to take a close look at our platform. It is very comprehensive. It is very detailed. It is very holistic when it comes to EV and electric mobility. Something myself, Minister Wilkinson, Minister O'Regan, and many other of our colleagues, François-Philippe Champagne, have thought long and hard to ensure that we provide something very interesting and very complete to Canadians going into the election.
Well, Steven Guilbeault, thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Steven. Et puis, bonne fin de campagne.
Merci beaucoup, Daniel. Thank you all.